And that's one of the things I mean about the shiny objects. That's something I coined a term a while back because I would always notice that things we would buy always followed shortly behind the cool new technology that was talked about in the headlines.
Welcome to GovCom Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Choi, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together. So we are here today with Mike Whisler, who has had an over 30-year career at the government, and he moved over to what we lovingly call the dark side, government contracting side. And we're super excited to hear from him. So I'm going to hand it to him to introduce himself and to kick us off.
Thanks, Alexa. I mean, over 30 years is right. I worked at 4 different agencies. So I didn't move around a lot, but to be honest, I moved wherever I could get a promotion and make more money. And that's what a lot of feds do. And along the way, I tried to work on interesting things and meet interesting people. But I mean, my whole career, it's been around contracting, acquisitions, procurement, whatever term you want to use. And I've risen from, we'll call it a GS7 up to a guy who pretended to run an organization. But I started my awesome career in a way that, it was just sheer luck. I moved here from Missouri, recently graduated in 91. And I was working at a pet store part-time, trying to make some money. And that's where I met my wife. That's a different story, though.
At the pet store? That is going to be a good story.
Yeah, it's a different story. Good or bad, depending on who you talk to. And I needed to make some more money. I will say that. And I went, back then they had something called Outstanding Scholars. And you went and took a test. And you could either start as, for those who know what I'm talking about, as a GS5 or a GS7. So you really want to score well and get that GS7 because, back then they're making a whole, I don't know, $20,000 a year. And I got 2 offers. One was to work at the Secret Service.
Oh.
One was to work at the Department of Energy as a contract specialist. I had no idea what that was, but I knew Secret Service, I had to carry a weapon, and I wasn't comfortable with that. And you also had to do your first 2 years. I think then it was at the White House, wearing the uniform. And that didn't appeal to me. So I said, I'll go try this contract specialist thing. I don't know what it is, but if they're willing to pay me a whopping $21,000 a year, I'm in.
I'm in.
So that's where I started. I spent like 6 years there. Go ahead.
When you first got into that role and you realized what being a contract specialist was, what did you think? Were you thinking like, okay, I'm going to grow in this acquisition field and become eventually what you were at the SEC, sort of running the entire procurement organization? Did you kind of see that for yourself?
Not in the beginning. In the beginning, I just saw it as a paycheck. And there were a bunch of us that came in at the same time, and we're hyper competitive. I was obnoxious. I gotta say, I look back. I
You were
was
obnoxious. I don't believe that. I mean, this is
yeah.
hard to believe.
I could have done it. We all reflect back. I could have done a better job of being friendly and emulating some other people that I saw how to network and make friends. That wasn't me. I tried to be the best I could, outshine everybody. Figuratively elbowing people out of the way. Yeah.
We've all been in our 20s. I get it.
Yeah. But it took me a few years to realize it could be a career. And it took me quite a while to realize I could have a really big influence on how the government does things. But in the beginning, it was just about making a paycheck and doing the best I could. Back then, the aspiration was if you could become a GS14, you were in. that was the goal. You were set. You look around at all these other GS-14s who were married to other GS-13s or 14s, and they had everything they wanted financially, independence, and that was the goal. Yeah, that didn't last very long. But it took me a long time to figure out one of my bigger philosophies was, federal agencies are heavily dependent upon contracting
Right.
to do their jobs. It took a long time for me to figure that out because I'm a little slow. But I realized that in getting where I was at, I could actually have eyes and ears on almost everything an agency does because they need contractors to assist or do almost everything. And so in a contracting group, you're sitting on a gold mine of information.
Right.
And if you can use that wisely, you can actually influence many things that an agency can do and hopefully help them, meet their mission, hopefully. So it
Right.
took me a long time to figure that out.
Well, I can see how, over 30 years in the government, it probably evolved a bit as well, right? So you started out as a contracting specialist, and even if you think about the technology that might have evolved over 30 years,
Yep.
you and I have had some spicy conversations about key personnel, about the use of the word, overuse of the word agile a few years ago. And then, as we were getting warmed up for this conversation, you said that the shiny objects, which we're going to
Mhm.
talk about your title in a minute,
Mhm.
but the shiny object of agile has been replaced by AI.
Yep.
So, as you think about the technology that has evolved over the last 30 years, what do you think about this extraordinary time to be alive with AI and then the complicated workflows that the contracting specialists have to think about now is do they use AI on their side of the fence
Mhm.
and then also the contracting side as well? Like we're writing an article about AI act bots, and you wouldn't believe the number of them out there.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a unique time, I think, right now, where as the government is trying to decide how, like what is the governance of this?
Yep. Well, I think the White House is trying to help with that, and we're all going to learn and storm and norm our way through that. But I
Yeah.
mean, just the technology changes alone, just my 30-year segment. Way back in the beginning, I was using whiteout, which some people don't even know what that is.
Whiteout.
We an aspiration was to someday have a Rolodex on my desk so that I could write somebody's name in it, and if I was lucky, I got their business card and I could staple it in on the Rolodex, and I was something. And so we would run around and make copies of things, and back then Xerox things and the whiteout. And now in today's world, that's all automated. Everybody can work from home because of just the touch of a button. Some of the things we used to spend hours doing are done in seconds. And the I think in the contracting arena, folks are just like everybody else. They're learning how to automate some of the important functions that the government does in the acquisitions field with AI, creation of solicitations,
Right.
managing the closeouts, the deobligations. And so there's a lot more going on than folks realize. But to your point, you just stated, it's there's a whole lot out there and it's not being brought together. It's everybody's kind of doing their own thing and they mean well. But that's a level of chaos that I think, in
Yeah.
my opinion, needs to be tamed if we're going to actually do this in a productive fashion. So, and that's one of the things I mean about the shiny objects. That's something I coined a term a while back because I would always notice that things we would buy always followed shortly behind the cool new technology that was talked about in the headlines.
Oh yeah.
And then each federal agency would start acquiring that. They honestly may not always known what to do with it, but they wanted to buy it.
Right.
And so we would spend a lot of time acquiring the nice shiny objects, and we wouldn't really have figured out how to use the last shiny object very well. But we always wanted the next one because that would be the answer, and then that would be the answer. And over my 30 plus years, I saw a pattern where it's a shame that we don't figure out how to use the things we already acquired before we move on to the next one and become much more efficient and effective. And, a lot of times agencies forgot how to do the basics because they were chasing the shiny objects, thinking that was the answer to everything. And many times that could have been the answer. But a lot of people got lost and left behind. And that's a different story for a different time. But that's the human aspect of it. Is folks got lost and left behind, or they felt that way because we're always chasing the shiny technology. So on one hand, it's cool to watch it happen.
Right.
On another hand, there's some, you got to care for the people too, and bring everybody along.
And I feel like caring for the people over technology, right? That's a whole
Yes.
other podcast maybe. But
Yes.
I was going to ask you about something specifically unsexy. So
Okay.
I remember at the SEC, you and I have had a lot of conversations about ITBM, and it kind of tracks back to what you were explaining, the IT technology business management side of the house. Like, what are we buying? How does it map back to what we already have? And how
Right.
does it play into the future of what we need? Right.
Yep.
And trying to get that nailed down so that we're not rebuying the same things over and over. How did you influence that and I remember you were very, very influential from that perspective. And what are some of the lessons that some of our government folks who are going to be listening to this might be able to emulate?
I don't really know if I was all that successful. I do know I got comfortable with my position where I would ask the question of, do we need this and why are we buying this?
Right.
Are we utilizing what we already have acquired to the maximum extent practical? And before we go waste more money on other things. Over time, my goal was to get other people to ask the same question, not just me. I didn't want to be the lone voice. I wanted to be in the chorus of
Right.
let's truth the power. Let's ask people why they're chasing these, and look at ourselves and have a really, ask the hard questions. Are we ready for the next level of technology, or should we really take a close look at what we already have? One of the things I'm trying to get folks to take a look at in the private sector here, and I haven't got their attention yet, is I think there's a commodity for going to other federal agencies and helping them take inventory of what they currently have, how they're optimizing it, could they optimize it better before they go spend more money on the next shiny object. I didn't have that much, my gauge of success. I didn't have, significant success, in my opinion, in that area. I think I had some incremental success in getting folks to ask questions and push back on folks chasing the shiny objects and the next technology. But I think if people could just ask the questions and don't be afraid, ask. It's okay to ask. Be responsible with your questions and try to get good answers. Be thought provoking.
Right.
So
I think that's really important. And if I hear you correctly, the thought of bringing, the government's tried FITARA, category management, SIPC, right? They have all these fancy ways of trying to categorize what they buy and map it back to the budgets and making sure that we're spending money wisely. And it's really questionable if we are actually doing a good job or not. So I can see the need for having that sort of commoditized and sold to the government to help them figure that out. And companies do that actually, and they do hire companies to do that.
mhm.
But I think that we're missing the human element between like the humans that are in charge of the projects who have put their blood, sweat, and tears on both sides, the government and the industry side, to make these projects successful and to kind of move the technology forward. And I feel like that's a constant like cha-cha. One step forward, one step back,
Yeah,
one step
that's
forward, one
it.
step back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I'm cautious with how I describe this because I still have a lot of friends and folks who are working hard, and I don't want to come across as I'm all smart now that I'm on the outside, and I'm not any smarter than when I was there. But folks do the government. They changed the names of things, and it was really in essence the same thing. They're trying to do a better job of understanding what they've acquired, how they've used it. And the one weakness that I would see consistently, it's really more than one, but the biggest one was there was no reconciliation. Now it's really boring to say that, but we never said how well did we do that? How
Right.
well did we acquire it? The For the federal government, success, at least in contracting, success was in, did we spend the money?
Right.
Did we obligate the funds? It wasn't how well did the project go? Were we on budget? Did did we use the technology the way the manufacturer created it to be implemented? We didn't really do a whole lot of that. All the concentration was on get it, buy it, own it. And then by the time you got to how well did we manage it, wasn't as much attention unless a third party came in to look at it and performed oversight.
Right.
And, and I think that, I don't know, I never found an answer to that other than, incentivize the folks in the right areas
Right.
and move away from incentivizing people to form the budget, manage the budget, and spend the money, because you know this as well as I. If you didn't obligate it or spend it, you might not get it next year.
Right.
And so the right question was, did we spend the money effectively that I gave you? Not did you spend it, period. So
Right.
it's boring, not sexy, but it's an important thing that I try to pass on to folks and see if they would, continue to ask the questions and how can we change things to incentivize the right aspects of what the government should be doing.
I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I hope other people find it to be so. Talking about things that are specifically unsexy.
Yeah, yeah, that's always interesting.
Oh, but I think the IT scorecard, right, is like how did the projects go? Mapped against the budget, mapped against what it was intended to do. But even with the IT scorecard, and the FATAR scorecard and category management, all these scorecards, right? I don't know that they're measuring the effectiveness of the
Correct.
technology that they purchase. And I think that's your point, right? It's like, how do you measure effectiveness against what you were trying and planning to do,
Correct.
especially when technology is moving so fast?
Right. I agree. I also think part of this, when you talked about the human side of it, folks are not, I sound folksy when I say that. People are not incented to be truthful.
Right.
And so there needs to be, I always wanted to create an environment where folks were safe to share, hey, it's not going as well as we thought it would. Let's talk about it. And so when you have these scorecards and you have this oversight, from the contractors all the way up to the person who's in charge of the federal side of it, they're not really incented to be truthful. And I'm
Right.
not saying anything that's a secret. I'm just saying it out loud. Um, and so if folks are not incented to be truthful, then how do we ever figure out and what the honest effectiveness of something is? Now, that doesn't mean there aren't individuals who do that.
Right.
But overall, in my limited scope of where I worked and what I encountered, it was hard to get folks to be truthful. They
Right.
did not feel comfortable sharing. We could have done it better. We could have done this differently. We could have reevaluated this. And so the scorecards, folks just want to say, I got the highest score I could.
Right.
And then we move on.
Right.
In reality, there's an entire cadre of individuals that are struggling to even make something mediocre.
Right.
Uh, but the folks who read the scorecards want to say everything was fantastic. And so there's a gap there that, how do we fill that gap in? How do we make folks comfortable sharing? Yeah, it didn't go as good as we thought it would.
So we're talking psychological safety and more retros, right?
A
So those are
little
two
bit.
different, very,
Yeah.
very, very humanistic things when it comes to IT. Having retros after
Yep.
procurements, right? What went well? What should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? What should we
Correct.
start? Right? So I think having a retro is something I really believe in. But even if you have them, implementing what folks have to say and then creating that safe space is really tough. So let me ask you this question. How how did you help people feel comfortable to share when things didn't go as well? Like what are some of the tactics that you used?
I don't know if I use tactics. I tried to that I'm aware of. I just, early in my career, I didn't create safe spaces. I can look back and go, yeah, that was not a strength of mine. I thought I was, but I wasn't. And, it takes some self-awareness, and you got to look figuratively in the mirror and go, well, am I personally creating a safe space for folks? So over the years, I tried to enlist folks who could help me figure that out, who could give me feedback on why are people not sharing the truth with me. It took me a long time to figure out that it's not easy to create a safe space,
Right.
because all it takes is one person to have a bad reaction in leadership, and all the work that we had done to create the safe space was gone.
Right.
And so that I don't have a perfect solution for that.
Right.
And I think it's almost, I don't think it's a top down kind of thing. In
Right.
other words, I don't think the White House can push it down and make it happen.
Right.
I think it's grassroots. I think it's person by person, group by group,
Right.
and you start to cultivate. It's okay to fail. I mean, agile, you heard me tell you, I'm so tired of hearing about agile. But there are things that came out of agile that we used to call agile something else before that,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Yep.
pragmatic modernization, or, pick the,
SDLC or
yeah,
yeah,
pick
there's
the
a
term.
whole bunch of things. Yeah.
But getting together and talking afterwards, I think the fancy term now is retrospective.
Yeah. Retro.
Um, and one of the other things is don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
It's okay to fail. What's the silly metaphor folks use? When Edison was finding the light bulb, or whoever really created the light bulb, they were successful once. They
Right.
failed 10,000 times.
Right.
We don't remember the 10,000 times. We remember the one time he was successful. So, I mean, creating an environment where folks are comfortable with failing and then talking about it afterwards,
Right.
not sexy, not interesting, but it's at the core of almost everything federal contractors do and the
Right.
federal government does. It's okay to fail. Let's learn
Right.
from that, pick ourselves up, and move on.
Right, right, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about your role now at Maximus and how do you help the company kind of, understand what the government, like government's perspective? Because I feel like whenever folks spend a long time in the government and go to the contracting side, it is extremely valuable and beneficial just having that point of view of the government experience.
I appreciate that. Your perspective. In my year in the transition has not been as easy as I thought it would be. Because wherever you go, there are humans, and they're not that different inside the federal government and outside. The cultures are a little different. Incentives are a little different, but really just humans. Um, I came in to give the actual customer perspective, to say, how would the government do this? How would the government react to this? What's the perception of the government? Not everybody wants to hear that. Individuals, I may come across individuals who find that interesting, but collectively, it's been a real struggle to get folks' attention, because they think they know it. They think because they've had some success, and they
Right,
have, that what they've been doing works, and they don't want to change it. And so, I basically I had no big announcement when I came in. There was no proclamation that the world's most progressive genius had come on board with Maximus. I just kind of showed up and nobody knew who I was. And I've developed some good relationships along the way, and try to win people over, and show that I have some credibility, and show value person by person. So it picks up over time.
right,
I think I thought I'd come in and just magically make things better. Yeah, like everything else, I didn't know what I was talking about. Um, and so it takes time to build that coalition. And that's
right,
and that's what I'm doing. And I've picked up some really good allies, met some really interesting people who are way smarter than I am, and I try to get near them so it rubs off on me, and I look smarter. But that's kind of what I'm doing, is every chance I get, I gather the folks that have the same viewpoint as me. Viewpoint as in they used to work for the government,
right,
and we share with others, this is what the government is doing, this is what we think, why they're doing it, and you know
right.
that better than I do, how important that can be
It's
if people listen.
it's critical, I think.
But people have to listen,
Yeah.
and they see value in it. And that's the hard part is, you know, sometimes I wonder it's the same with the government. If I was a high priced consultant that came in at $1 million an hour, I think people would listen to me more. That was the case with the government. The more expensive the consultant, the more easily they were heard. Not always true and accurate, but they were heard. And I think the same, I'm seeing the same thing in private sector. We want to go get consultants. We want to go get experts. And it's like, no, you got people sitting right here
Yeah.
that have the answer. You have people that have been with the company for 15 years that have the answer.
Right. Right.
They're just not listening. They're not being heard. So it's the same struggle wherever you go.
Right. Okay, so we're going to pivot into a couple of questions that I'm going to be asking everybody. So hopefully folks that start listening to my podcast will look forward to hearing the answers to these questions. So my first question of these two questions is, if you had to give two pieces of advice for somebody out there watching your journey and wanting to become like you when they grow up, what would those two pieces of advice be?
Uh, Run and work for the private sector. Um, but no, after that, I would say, I've already kind of touched on it. Don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Um, do not be afraid to fail. Take a chance, add your value. And one of the things that took me the longest time to fully understand, build a network. You got to build a network.
I feel like this one is so important for younger people, especially because
Yes,
if they spend more time on other social media than on LinkedIn,
yes,
then they're doing it wrong. So I heard about this thing called TikTok or TikTok. I don't even know. I mean, I like TikToks, I like the white ones. They're great. I definitely do
Kirby.
not have TikTok downloaded on my phone. I have no idea how it works. But I feel like the younger generation, the 20s and early 30s, should really be building out their personal brand, right? On LinkedIn. How do you want to show up? How do you want to grow? Did you find your mentors? And it's not easy, right? So I think it's really important that you brought that up. So thank you.
Yeah. And to me, 'cause I'll show my age, networking is not about social networking. That's an aspect.
Right.
But the networking that I'm really talking about is talking to people, getting to know people,
Right.
finding people who can you have common goals with, establishing a rapport with. You can do that through social media, absolutely. But there's nothing better than person to person interaction.
Absolutely.
That that is a must. And so it took me the longest time to realize what networking was. I thought I could do everything on my own. It's not, doesn't work that way. And I proved it time and time again that you cannot. It wasn't until I started listening to other people and they would share, they would coach me. And I wouldn't have gotten that coaching had I not been trying to network and create that, support system that we all need in
Right.
order to go do great things or to do anything, to be quite honest. We all need a good support system.
So, Mike, are you talking about building a community? Because that's
Yeah,
kind of
I
what
am.
I'm hearing. Yes,
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's actually the most important thing we do as humans.
yeah, absolutely. We're not built to do things individually. I mean, we can, and it might be through dumb luck that it happens, and there's always the exception of somebody who's a maverick and went off and did
Right,
great things, but they never tell the story of all the people that helped them get there and supported them and pushed
right,
them through. They only talk about the one person that
right.
did it. And so, yeah, the almost everything I ever look at is an ecosystem. Everything is an ecosystem. And so the networking is building a community, but even as boring as acquisitions, all the acquisitions are tied together. You just have to see how they're tied together. If you can just see how the people are tied together, you can see how to bring folks to bear to solve problems. I'm simplistic in that, and who am I to give advice? But yeah, you're right. The community is enormous, and I think we've been getting away from that for a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah. I
So
think I'm not sure that technology has helped us.
no,
Nobody wants to pick up the phone and talk. And hey, I'm one of those. I'd rather text somebody than talk to somebody on the phone. I get it. But, like you said, meeting somebody in person, face to face. And that's one of the things that you and I had that benefit because when we were working together,
Mhm.
you were at the SEC, I was a contractor. We met in person. And there was no question about whether we were going to be meeting online or doing this remotely because we didn't do that back then. It
Right.
sounds funny. It made it sound old, right? It was
Yeah, no,
like what, 4 years ago?
it's a different
Um,
era. Ooh, so
I
long ago.
I know it was pre-COVID. Yeah, and the SEC did not have a remote work policy. So you showed up at the office every single day. And things have just from there evolved so fast, right? Everybody's
Right.
remote and nobody's in person and this and that. And so it's really a whole different dynamic, especially when we're talking about community building and networking.
Yeah, I think people are still catching up
Yeah.
to the changing culture. We all know that. I mean, COVID is a marker in human history
Yeah.
that we're not going to get away from, and it's going to take a while to figure out how to make that work and how to respond to it. But we in technology is the coolest thing, shiny objects. And I get amazed at some of the cool shiny objects that come out. But I have to talk myself down from that and
Right.
remember it's about the people. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's about people. It's about moving people forward. The technology can help, but I don't think the technology can in of itself can solve it. It can make it easier, it can make it harder. But at the end of the day, we have people and we need to build that community and we need to foster those relationships. That's my big lesson, my wow lesson learned that, I go back and my grandmother tried to explain that to me when I was a teenager and I was too smart. She didn't know what she was talking about. And now I look back and go, golly, man, if I just paid attention to her when I was 16, what could I have done in my life?
All right. Right.
Instead, I spent 30 years validating what she told me.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is that people are the shiny object.
Yeah,
That
they
that
are.
that should be the title of this entire
That's it.
podcast is
That's
people
it.
are the shiny object, right?
Without the people, nothing can be done.
Right, right,
And you got to make people comfortable and feel confident that they can add value and that they can speak up. Because it's amazing to me some of the ideas that don't get shared until you're one on one. And I ask folks, just some brilliant people that I run across, why don't you speak up? I'm
right,
afraid. I don't think people will welcome the idea. I think people will push back on it. And so if we don't create that safe space,
right,
it's just it kind of makes me sad how many
right.
things we've missed and how many things are pass us by, and some of the ideas that are lost because we don't allow folks an opportunity to speak up and be part of the community, as you say it. But yeah, people are the shiny objects.
People
Nice
are the
one.
shiny objects. So Mike, last question. What is your superpower and how did you know? How do you know what it is? Like, what is it and how did you identify it? And
I
how do
don't
you
know if I have a superpower. I think if I were to collectively look back at all the things that, comments that people have given me, the only thing I have close is I can see through the chaos and see what the real issue is relatively fast. And I know that sounds like a weird superpower, but chaos surrounds us and it prevents us from understanding what we're trying to accomplish. I can see through that most of the time. It doesn't mean people are going to listen to me,
right?
but I have some level of comfort that I can come into a figurative room and quickly identify, oh, that's what's going on. I just then have to figure out what to do about it.
Right. But I think seeing through the chaos and understanding the problem quickly is a valuable superpower and sounds like one that you've kind of had to grow and build over time.
Yes.
It's not like you said when you were 16, you thought
No.
you were the superpower.
Yes, absolutely. I thought I wore a cape and I could fly. It took me a long time. One of my best friend kind of shared his observation a few years back, and I had that aha moment. I went, "Oh, that's it. You're right. That's the thing that makes me slightly different." And so I spent the last decade or so trying to figure out how to use that, and if I can. Um, and sometimes it's handy, sometimes it's not. You gotta like the old saying, you got to pick your battles.
Right.
Are folks willing to jump in and help? Timing's you've lived long enough. I've lived long enough. Timing is very important.
Oh yeah.
Um,
It's
and,
everything,
and you
actually.
got, yep. And so
Yeah.
just because I can see through the chaos and notice things, time might not be right.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to say, I've been doing this a long time and I've worked with a lot of feds and I have a lot of my favorite feds and, for different reasons. You were definitely one of my favorite feds because you were real and you did not like sugarcoat anything, bullshit anybody. You took a room of contractors that were trying to sell you shiny objects and you wrangled them in a way that I had never seen before. You had some of the biggest companies in your, out there in the room, and from the small companies to the big companies, and you treated everybody the same, everybody with respect, and you gave everybody the same opportunities. You were always very small business friendly, which I really appreciated. And you fostered teaming between bigs and smalls. And it was my first time on a BPA IDIQ to see that, actually. When you said, why don't you guys work together instead of competing against each other? Like bring something better to the table together. And
Yeah,
that was a unique thing to see. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
I appreciate that. It's very nice of you to say nice things about me since it's
Yeah.
being recorded and other people may or may not see it. So I appreciate. I gotta give you, I toss that back. I always, you notice that I was always okay with you sitting up front, um,
With
because you
my
would
pin
ask,
with the fluffy end on it, and I was
yeah,
always waving it around.
you would ask questions that others were afraid to ask. Um, and that's very helpful when you're trying to, as you say, wrangle a large group of folks because, whether you knew it or not, you were an ally.
Yeah.
And because I could get you to say things that needed to be said by somebody other than me. And so you are actually you were very instrumental in making some of those little changes that we were trying to put in place back then.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think neither one of us were making a lot of friends.
That is true.
But,
That's true.
but I didn't think that was the goal. You and I both have that view of trying to move it forward. So that's what we were trying to do. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today. As we draw the curtain on today's chapter of GovCom Unfiltered, I want to thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey through the intricate world of federal contracting. I'm Alexa Choi, and it's been an honor to navigate these stories of courage, innovation, and resilience with you. Until we meet again, keep pushing boundaries, exploring new horizons, and making your mark in the government contracting universe. Farewell for now, but not forever. Stay tuned for more adventures that await in the next episode of GovCom Unfiltered. Safe travels on your path to greatness, and remember, we are all on this journey together.